Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Destination Uri. It is the morning programme. I'm Rowan Hand. This is Anthony Russell, the author, the historian, the former school teacher, the retiree now who will not lie down, who will never retire, and the book is out. And it's Between Two Flags.
Between Two Flags, yes.
The story of John Mitchell and Jenny Verner.
Verner.
Wow. We're still trying to sort out the business of being between two flags, Anthony. Now, does your book throw any kind of guidelines to us? Does the provenance of the two people involved offer us any kind of pattern for going forward?
Well, it's really between two flags, as you might understand. John Mitchell and Jenny Verner. The two flags in question are the Irish tricolour and the Confederate battle flag, which at first sight might appear to be out of sync, since the tricolour was really only raised over the GPO.
That's right.
But it was Mitchell way back in 1848 said that the tricolour should be the national banner of Ireland when Maher brought it back from Paris. And there's a plaque actually outside the Abbey Theatre to that effect. The other flag is the Confederate battle flag.
Yes. And
the Mitchells lost two sons fighting for the Confederacy. They lost their youngest, young Willie, in the 1st Virginia's charge at Cemetery Hill at Gettysburg. He was hit, down he went, and he didn't have the good sense to stay down. He got up, went forward again, and he was killed. Their eldest lad, Captain C. Mitchell, was commander Fort Sumter. And in fact, he was in command of the first battery that fired to open the Civil War.
My goodness.
And when the Union troops came to take the islands on the fort back, then he died on his battlements.
It was a big sacrifice for Mitchell to have lost two of his sons.
It was an awful sacrifice for himself and Jenny, made worse by the fact that really they were both on the wrong side of history. Their story is tremendously exciting. It's more exciting than Gone with the Wind. Scarlett O'Hara was a wimp compared to Jenny Verner.
Wow.
When the Union forces were coming in to take Richmond, her roof was on fire, her windows were exploding. The Confederate army had left. There was great fear to what the black troops might do when they get into Richmond. When they actually get in, they behave like gentlemen. But unfortunately, the Mitchells were fighting for the Confederacy. Not like Robert E. Lee, reluctantly supporting an institution, the institution of slavery, but wholeheartedly supporting the institution of slavery.
Why didn't Mitchell support slavery wholeheartedly?
I suppose the simple answer is that he was educated in John Mitchell Place, as we now know it. You would have known it as McManus's Pawn Shop.
Yes,
in your youth.
Would indeed.
That was Dr. Henderson's classical school.
My goodness.
And himself and John Martin went to school there. The clue is in classical. Mitchell gave a lecture in, I think, 1854 in the University of Virginia, and his opening line was, "There's no such thing as progress," and he meant it.
My
Now,
goodness.
he would acknowledge change, obviously, particularly technological change, but in terms of human thought, he reckoned that we hadn't advanced since the Roman Republic.
Yes.
And his speech from the dock, he saw himself in that speech as a Roman. Therefore, his worldview really was classical Roman worldview. And if you have that worldview, then you accept the hierarchy of society. He was a patrician, there were plebs, plebeians, and of course there were slaves.
There were slaves.
Even when the Confederacy had lost the Civil War, himself and Jenny found it very hard to believe that the blacks people could look after themselves.
Yeah.
That was his belief.
You see, I've been struggling to find how this icon of Newry could be a good man, but now you put it into a context which allows me to come to grips with the notion of a goodness coinciding with support for something that I perceive to be as evil as slavery.
Yeah, so with President Obama in the White House, it's very hard from our perspective to get a grip on it. And I don't think he can be forgiven because there are people who are fighting the Union side to get rid of slavery, Lincoln and so on. But I think we can understand him a bit better in that context.
Perhaps more than anything, that's everything your book has done, because there, to the best of my knowledge, there was no substantial work previously telling the story in the way you have told it.
You're doing people like James Quinn, who was kind enough to launch my book last week, and in Justice he wrote a very fine biography of Mitchell for the Royal Irish Academy, I think back in 2007. There was a lady called Rebecca O'Connor from the south, southern states, who wrote a very affectionate biography of Jenny Mitchell.
Yeah.
But
yours is the
what I've
story.
done, I've tried to bring the two together and involve their politics as well as their romance.
Yeah, politics and romance living under the one roof.
Yes.
And that seemed to work for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It did. Well, they had a tremendous life, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
But it was a tragic life.
Yeah. That tragedy was exacerbated, of course, with the American experience and all of the thing of the loss of the sons. What were the circumstances that brought them to America?
Mitchell and Jenny eloped and were married in Drumcree.
Famous place here.
In that iconic church. And they were married in the Tower, which existed then. The rest of the building didn't, but the Tower existed. And their marriage book is still in Drumcree, and we had an exhibition a couple of times. They then had a very pleasant life, a young middle-class couple visiting their good friend John Martin in Loughorn, opening a practice here in Uri, opening a practice in Banbridge. But Mitchell was drawn to the Nation in Dublin.
He was the editor, was he?
He wasn't the editor.
No.
Gavin Duffy was the editor, and Gavin very often put the blue pencil through Mitchell's work, and it ignited a lifelong hostility between the two men. But to try and answer the question, from the 1848 rebellion and the famine, he was transported to Van Diemen's Land. He escaped from Van Diemen's Land, went to San Francisco with Jenny and the family. They went through the South American jungles, Central American jungles, and arrived in New York, where he was treated as a great hero. But then he got involved with Southern politics, and he liked the idea of an inert agricultural society. And he saw that as the antithesis of steam-driven factories in the north, which enslaved people at machines. He did have the view that the black on the plantation was probably better treated than the proletariat in a mill. Therefore, he was drawn to Southern politics, and unfortunately, his family was also drawn to Southern politics. So the working out was that they lost two sons. Yeah,
the die was cast at that time, and it went on from there. I just sense we're talking about two great adventurers.
You are. In terms of the 19th century, their travel was heroic, particularly Jenny. And Jenny, without John, because he was already in Van Diemen's Land, took the children, 5 of them, down to Van Diemen's Land and lived with John. They had a farm there, a ticket of leave farm. They then made their way to the States. They then made their way to Paris. In Paris, when the Civil War broke out, Jenny came back here on her own. Their eldest girl, Henrietta, became a Catholic. And it's all part of this paradox that they were very tolerant and they had no problem at all with their daughter becoming a Catholic.
I think it's beautiful.
They had no time for ethnic animosity at all. Then Jenny, when the wee lad was killed, Jenny thought he was missing in action, refused to believe he'd been killed, and then took the remainder of the family to the Confederacy, which meant running a Union blockade. Their ship was fired upon, they were shipwrecked, and then arrived in Richmond.
Definitely adventurous.
So it's a huge adventure.
Is that what drew you to the story? Or this has consumed you intellectually for quite a while now. What are the touchstones in there?
Well, as I said the other night, the book's probably called Between Two Flakes, but actually the genesis of it was Between Two Houses, because I was reared in Dominic Street, or Queen Street as it was in Uri, in the very house beside Jenny Verner's. And I played in Jenny Verner's garden, and my father told me the story of John Mitchell and Jenny Verner. We then moved to Drumlane, to number 3 Drumlane Road, and from there we could see the very window where John Mitchell died. So throughout my formative years between those two houses, I became extremely interested in this story. And then, of course, the more I discovered about it, how this great Republican hero had feet of clay, as all heroes have feet of clay, then it became even more interesting, and I wanted to tackle the paradox and see if we could get to the bottom of it.
His friend and fellow Newry man, John Martin, Mitchell and Martin, they were poles apart in terms of how to deal with political dilemmas. Their political thought matured in different directions, but when they were in Dr. Henderson's school, they would have had very similar thoughts, but their personalities are always different. Mitchell would combust
quite easily. Martin was a much more thoughtful man. Mitchell was a very handsome man. John Martin wasn't a handsome man.
Yeah.
But at the end of their lives, I think Martin had probably achieved more than Mitchell. I think, particularly from Newry, we tend to think of Martin as the moon, the nationalist moon to Mitchell's Republican sun.
Yes.
But
yes.
And all he did was really live in the reflected glory of Mitchell. That's not true.
No.
And I think when we examine Martin's own career, he was certainly his own man. But he had a tremendous respect and admiration and love for John Mitchell and Jenny.
What was the Newry like that housed these two wonderful personalities? Martin, Mitchell, and then the third person, Jenny, with whom Mitchell fell in love.
Well,
what kind of Newry was it?
Well, it was on the valley floor, it was on the floodplain. It had a prosperity from the canal. But Jenny herself, now, she was a Jenny Verner. The Verners were founders of the Orange Order. There's a plaque on Dawson Street in Dublin which commemorates the fact. Her father was Captain James Verner, the unfortunate James. He was supposed to inherit the estates, and for some reason he didn't, and was therefore known as the unfortunate James. So you ask me about what the town was like. Well, in Dominic Street, Lord Russell Colone's father built 3 fine big houses there in what was Queen Street. He had his brewery, which was Lupton's Mill, when you and I were young.
Yes, indeed.
And associated with the mill, they needed these 3 houses. He was the father for Lord Russell of Killowen,
yes.
a great nationalist family. And they were great friends of the Verners.
My goodness.
Jenny, unfortunately, however, was taken into the marriage through her mother, Mary Ward, with her brother Richard. And if you look at Burke's peerage, Captain James Verner wasn't married when he died. Therefore, they were living as man and wife in Dominic Street, something which the Verners threw back at Jenny when Mitchell himself died and hurt her.
Yeah. There was a closeness, but at the same time a propensity for putting the dagger in, so to speak.
Well, they were off our situation. The Verners were landed aristocracy. They were of the ascendancy. The Mitchells were middle-class liberals.
Yes.
So there was going to be tension. And then in the background, of course, you had the Catholic population of Newry.
Have you, in the book, has it now sufficiently underpinned the truth, the story, the legend, the facts of the whole thing?
I don't think there are facts in history, or if they are, they're almost inaccessible. I think the history is made up of perceptions, and our perception of Mitchell has changed greatly. So the book, I think, changed many people's perception of Mitchell. But I think it will also ask them to respect what was good about him, as well as try and understand what was bad about him.
He seems, with the honourable exception of yourself, he seems to have slipped very easily from our knowledge and from our awareness of the period. And the story, his own story, seems to have slipped away. It's not foremost in the minds of Newry people.
No, and he stands there in a statue, and people walk past ignore him. Pearse said, I think, I can't remember the exact quote, but that he was one of the 4 writers of the Gospels of Irish nationalism. And Pearse had great admiration for him. De Valera had great admiration for him. And if you remember De Valera's 1843 speech, which you may or may not, it was sort of parodied as maidens dancing at the crossroads. But in that speech, a very thoughtful speech, he talked about his vision of Ireland, an Ireland of cottages, where the youth respect the elders and so on and so forth. They're really a dreary place. And that was Mitchell's Ireland, because that speech from De Valera is almost taken out of Mitchell's jail journal. And by the time he got to the 1960s, that Ireland was in deep trouble. Yes. So much so that T.K. Whitaker went to, I think it was Lamass, and said, if we don't change our economic policies, not only will we will be reapplying for admission to the Commonwealth, we'll be asking to get back into the United Kingdom.
My goodness.
And then economic policy changed. And as we know, Ireland became much more outlooking, welcomed British investment, etc. The North then, after the Troubles, Britain's role has changed. Putting that together with his support of slavery, he has fallen out of the nationalist consciousness. And this is the 200th anniversary of his birth, on the 3rd of November. And I don't think there are too many Republican parties never mind nationalist parties, which are rushing to remember John Mitchell, which is a pity in many ways.
It is a pity in many ways, but he's well remembered in your book, and it's Between Two Flags. Anthony Russell, the author, and the book is available at Waterstones and Eason's in Newry, and online, I suppose, as well.
I think it is available
these things
online,
work in a strange
yeah.
way.
The publisher is Marion Press in Dublin.
Marion Press in Dublin. It's a beautiful book. It's from a tactile point of view. It's easy to touch, handle. It's a nice feel to it, quality throughout, and beautifully written. And the story is there for you. Anthony Russell, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank
Take
you.
care.